world's second largest economy. Now, how has your country reached this milestone so quickly?
I think number one is because we found the road which is suitable to China. That means the top success of China is that we have found our own road to development. And secondly, we have been keeping reform and opening up. So China's success is really a success of reform and opening up. By opening up, we mean we embraced the global economy in every level and in every aspect. And third, I would say this reform is not only about economic development, it's about comprehensive reform. It's a reform in political, economic, cultural, education spheres. It really touched every aspect of the life of the Chinese people. I think some people have a misunderstanding of reform in China if they think China only carried out economic reform, not a reform in political system. I think it's been hardly imagined when you do not have a people freed, emancipated, to have creative ideas that you can end it up with such a successful economic development.
Some economists are actually saying, they're predicting that China will, within the next 10 years, become the world's most prosperous economy. Now, do you think that is realistic?
I think China's economy will continue to enjoy fast growth because there's still a lot of space for China's growth. But when we talk about China, we really have to look at China not only at its aggregate figures. So in terms of aggregate economic figures, China is number 2. But per capita GDP, China is still behind 100 countries. So China is still a developing country. We have to remember that China is a country of 1.3 billion population. And among this 1.3 billion population, there's still 150 million people living under poverty line, UN poverty line. That is $1 a day. And we still have, out of this 1.3 billion population, more than half of them are still peasants living in rural areas, country areas. So though we in China have a very rich regions in coastal areas, rich cities, but we still have a very poor countryside in the far west or wild west area in China. So it's still a long way for China to be a developed country. Even someday, I do not know how soon it will be, China become number 1 in terms of aggregate economy, but I think China was still very much far behind comparing with the developed countries like UK and with the United States. As I said in my presentation, China's per capita GDP is just about 1/9 of UK and 1/10 of the United States. We have to make a lot of efforts, to catch up with the developed countries.
You've touched on some of the points I was going to raise in my next question. I mean, you've talked about the country, China, in the process of rebalancing its economy to place more emphasis on domestic consumption. And China is experiencing perhaps the largest and fastest urbanization in history as more and more of the population move from the rural towns into cities. Now, given these internal shifts, will China be able to sustain the growth, that rapid growth?
I think so. But I can't promise that China will. It's difficult to predict that China will continue to enjoy 2-digit growth for the next 30 years. But I believe that there's still enough space for China growth. The ratio of urban and rural is still very low comparing with the other developed countries. And as I said, that we still have a half of the population living in countryside. So we are still in the very initial stage of industrialization and urbanization. So within that, according to some forecasts, that in the next 20 years, there will be 300 million people will be moved from countryside to cities. So there will be enormous demand for China's economic development. So I think there's no lacking force to drive China's economic growth. So I feel very optimistic about China's growth, economic growth.
Is there an opportunity then within China's growth for the rest of the world?
I think so. I think I tend to believe that China's development really presents a lot of opportunities for the world, both in terms of China's imports. Take EU for example. Last year I think the EU had trade deficit with many countries, but EU's export to China jumped to 32%, and the UK for another example, that its export to China increased by 42%, and China became the fastest growth market for British exports. And China's economy really serves as a driving engine for its neighboring countries. China is the largest importer of products from many countries like South Korea, Malaysia, many other neighboring Asian countries. And I think China really contributes both in terms of its economic growth, but also in the area that China is a responsible player in formulating the rules and the governance of the global economy. China has been a very active participant in the new mechanism like G20, which involve both developed countries and developing countries, in working together to fight against financial crisis, to ensure early recovery of a world economy. China has been very active, participate in all these platforms.
You second-guessed me, because I was going to move on to that point as my final question, and that is that how would you assess progress so far on, if you like, the Go Global policy for Chinese companies? And what do you see as the next steps in the Chinese companies going global?
I think it has been policy, government policy, to encourage our business to go global, because we encourage them to participate in international competition. And I think more and more Chinese companies have accumulated a lot of experiences. They are strong enough, mature enough to face the world, to participate in the international competition. And we're also very pleased with the performance of Chinese companies. For instance, last year we've seen the 70% of growth, increase of Chinese investment overseas, which I think reached the figure about 59 billion US dollars. According to some forecasts, that by year 2015, China will invest 350 billion US dollars, making China the #1 investor overseas. So, there's enormous opportunities for Chinese investment. We have to find a profitable market. We hope UK is one of Chinese investment destination. And I think basically, Chinese companies looking for infrastructure and service sectors, that is really new areas, natural resources, and also banking, financial sectors is also of their interest. We've seen many Chinese companies one China automaker also bought Volvo, and they are looking even for other British brand. They want to have some the brand names to invest. It's difficult for me to give their names because they are still in the sensitive phase of negotiations. And a Chinese company invested in the oil refinery in UK, and some service sectors like distribution center, and we're also interested in have our investment in infrastructures like a high-speed railway. Some Chinese companies have in the very initial phase of discussion with their British counterparts. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much.
With my pleasure.